I could feel the vibration of the phone in my hand, but it wasn't the usual kind of notification. It was different, colder somehow. My fingers hesitated for a second before swiping across the screen. The words hit me like a slap. "We don't want anything to do with you anymore. You made your choice." I stared at the message, blinking, trying to comprehend the gravity of what it said. My heart raced, my breath became shallow as if the air had suddenly turned dense, pressing against my chest. I could feel my fingers trembling, the phone slipping ever so slightly in my grip. How was this possible? Was I reading it wrong? I quickly dialed her number, hoping, praying that this was some kind of misunderstanding. But after the first few rings, there was no answer. I tried again and again and again. Each time it rang louder in the silence, mocking me. No one was on the other side. The phone dropped from my hand, crashing onto the floor. For a long, terrible moment, I didn't move. I just sat there staring at the dark screen, unable to process it. My mind raced through 1,000 thoughts. How could she do this? After all I'd done for her, after everything I had sacrificed, this was the thanks I got. My mind flashed back to all those sleepless nights when she was a child, the endless hours I spent in doctors' offices, the sacrifices I made to ensure she had everything she needed. I poured every ounce of love, every last bit of energy into raising her, giving her what I never had. I loved her as my own, even though she wasn't. I thought, I knew, I believed that she saw me as her mother. Yet here I was, a stranger to her, abandoned without a second thought. A searing mix of anger and despair surged inside me, burning my chest. Why had I done it all? Why had I given everything for someone who had so easily discarded me? I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The emptiness inside me felt hollow, like a dark, endless void that swallowed every ounce of hope, leaving nothing behind but a numb ache. I grabbed the phone again, my fingers slick with sweat. The urge to call her once more surged up, but my throat tightened. I couldn't. There was no point. She didn't want me. She didn't care. The realization hit me harder than anything. I had been used. All those years, all those resources, they hadn't been enough. I'd given her everything, but it wasn't enough. She had used my love as a means to her own ends, never once looking back at the woman who had given her everything, including the last of my babies. I could see it now, clearer than ever before. The lavish trips she'd gone on, the designer clothes I'd paid for, the cosmetic procedures that drained my hard-earned money, all for her vanity, all for her selfish desires. It had all been a lie. She had taken from me, drained me dry, and never once did she offer anything in return. I had been a tool for her to climb higher, a stepping stone to her dreams that didn't involve me. I let out a strangled breath, my chest tightening even more. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. The cold reality of what I had just discovered hit me like a tidal wave. The phone dropped from my hand again, and this time I didn't bother picking it up. I stood up shakily and stumbled to the window, the dim light from outside barely penetrating the heavy curtains. The room felt suffocating, the air thick with the weight of what had just happened. I felt invisible, as though all my efforts, all my sacrifices meant nothing, nothing at all. The silence in the room was oppressive, and I realized that it wasn't just the room that felt dark, it was me. I was alone. I had nothing left. Not her, not anyone. I sank to the floor, my back pressed against the cold wall, my head in my hands. How had I gotten here? How had I let myself become so utterly lost in someone else's world that I forgot to live for myself? I closed my eyes, hoping the darkness would swallow me whole. But the darkness didn't comfort me. It didn't offer the relief I craved. Instead, it mocked me. And then, without even realizing it, my mind began to drift. It drifted back to my childhood, to the things I had been taught, to the woman I once was. What had shaped me into this? What had led me down this path of self-sacrifice? The silence around me seemed to press closer, drawing me deeper into my thoughts. This was just the beginning, I realized. It was only now that the real journey, the real test, would begin. The pain of her words still echoed in my mind, but it began to fade like the last remnants of a storm. It wasn't gone, but it was quieter now, buried under the weight of the memories that had been rising up within me. The room felt suffocating once again, but not because of the silence. No, this time it was the weight of my past pressing against me, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I leaned back against the cold wall, eyes closed, and I let myself fall into the memories that had always haunted me. I was back in that cramped, dimly lit room of my childhood home, the smell of stale food and mildew heavy in the air. I could hear their voices, harsh, cruel, always telling me I wasn't enough. Why can't you be more like her? My mother's voice still rang in my ears, so cold, so dismissive. She didn't care, she never had. I had learned to fend for myself from the very beginning. The days of begging for a scrap of food, the endless hours spent hiding from their anger, became a twisted form of normality for me. Love wasn't something I could afford, it was a luxury I could only dream of. I'd spent so many nights alone in that dark room, thinking about how I could escape. How could I get away from this? How could I make my life different? The only thing that kept me going was the small, flickering hope that maybe one day I could break free. Maybe one day I could have a family of my own. Maybe, just maybe, I could be the mother I never had, the mother who would care, who would love. I had wanted to give everything to my daughter. I had tried so hard to give her what I never had, the love I craved, the attention I needed. It was everything I hadn't received. I put my heart into her, poured everything I had into giving her the world. I had hoped that by loving her, I could somehow heal the parts of me that had been broken all those years ago. But what did I get in return? I ran my fingers through my hair, tugging slightly, as if that would somehow pull me from the heavy weight of these memories. I knew the answer, of course. I knew why I had done it all. The question was, why had I believed it would be enough? It wasn't just about the money or the material things I had provided her. No, it was something deeper. I had feared becoming like them. I had feared becoming cold, indifferent, like the parents who had raised me. I had feared becoming someone who couldn't care enough, couldn't give enough, and in my effort to avoid that, I had given it all. I had poured my soul into her, hoping she would reflect that love back. But as the memories swirled around me, something else became clear, something I hadn't wanted to admit. I wasn't just trying to avoid becoming them. I was afraid of becoming someone who could turn their back on another human being as they had done to me. I was terrified of being that cold, that distant. I had lived my whole life battling that fear, trying to ensure it never became part of me. But there it was, staring me in the face. The same coldness I had feared, the same distance. It was all coming back. I had tried to give her everything, and she had discarded me like I was nothing. I pulled my knees to my chest, wrapping my arms around them as I sank lower to the floor. The emptiness inside me felt even deeper now, gnawing at my insides. I looked at the phone, still lying on the floor, shattered and useless. I felt the weight of every moment I had spent loving her. I thought about the friends I had reached out to, the ones who had tried to offer words of comfort. But none of them could understand, none of them could fill the void she had left in me. I had tried to hold on to hope, to believe that something, anything, could heal the scars of my pup, but here I was alone, alone in a way I had never been before. The memories of my childhood seemed to suffocate me, their shadows creeping into my present. I wasn't just losing her, I was losing myself. I'd always promised myself I wouldn't be like them, that I wouldn't become someone who abandoned others. But was that even possible now? Was there any way forward from here? A deep breath escaped me, shaky and uncertain. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay stuck in this endless cycle of pain and regret. I had to do something, anything to break free from it. I stood up, feeling the weight of everything settle around me. But as I moved to the window, I paused. Something in me shifted. The years of hurt, the memories, they weren't all that defined me. I had worked too hard to get to where I was, to let them rule me now. I was stronger than this. I had to be. But as I gazed out of the window, something else stirred within me, something more than just the pain of my past, something tied to the present, to my daughter. I couldn't escape it. No matter how much I tried, no matter how far I ran, the ties that bound me to her were too strong. I couldn't let go, and maybe that was the problem. But then a strange feeling washed over me. What if, just maybe, this was my chance to rebuild? What if this wasn't the end? I closed my eyes, a fleeting sense of clarity washing over me. I couldn't let the past define me. I had to move forward. I had to, but how? Before I could think any further, something pulled me back to the present, something that felt even heavier than my past. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The thought of it, of what my daughter had left behind, tugged at me, more insistent than anything else. I had to face it. But could I? Was I strong enough? I didn't know the answer yet, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't over, and I wasn't done fighting. Not yet. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The silence around me, the emptiness of the room was suffocating. My mind kept circling back to her, my daughter, the love I had poured into her, the sacrifices I had made. But the more I thought, the more the pieces started to fall into place, each one heavier than the last. I'd been so blinded by my need to love, to fix the broken parts of myself through her. I thought that if I gave everything, my time, my money, my energy, I would build something stronger than my past. But the truth, the harsh, bitter truth began to crawl under my skin like a venomous serpent. It wasn't that she needed help. No, that was the lie I'd been feeding myself. She didn't need me. She had never needed me. What she needed was a source, a way to keep her life moving forward without ever feeling the weight of the consequences, a way to use my love, my care, my resources as a tool for her convenience. And I had let it happen. The sickening realization hit me like a slap to the face. She had used me. She had taken everything, my money, my heart, my life, and turned it into something disposable, something she could take without a second thought, without ever looking back, and I had allowed it. I had been so eager to be the mother she needed that I ignored the fact that she never wanted a mother at all. I found myself standing, pacing the floor, trying to make sense of it all. But there was no making sense of it. There was only the sting of betrayal and the crushing weight of self-deception. That's when I found it. I had been sifting through her things, desperate for some clue, some reason that could explain this. My fingers moved over her phone, which I had carelessly left on the table, and without really thinking, I unlocked it. I never expected to find what I did. A message, a conversation, one I wasn't supposed to see. The words were harsh, I'm almost mocking. It's so easy with her. She'll never say no. She doesn't even know she's being used. I felt the blood drain from my face. There it was, a confession, a cold, calculated admission of everything I had feared. She had been using me all along. She had manipulated me, taken advantage of my love, and I had been so blind to it. The feeling of being duped, betrayed by my own flesh and blood, was almost too much to bear. How could I have been so stupid? How had I allowed it to go on for so long? There was no remorse in her words, no guilt, no explanation. Just the simple, blunt reality that she had used me for her own selfish desires, and that was all I would ever be to her. I sat down, stunned, unable to move. My hand shook as I put the phone back down on the table. I stared at it, my mind struggling to process what had just unfolded in front of me. She didn't care. She never had. I had spent years, giving everything to someone who didn't even see me as a person, just a tool, just someone to exploit. The mother I had always longed to be, the mother who would protect, who would give, had become nothing more than a source of convenience. I had allowed myself to be used, and now I was paying the price. The tears threatened to come, but I held them back. I refused to cry over this. I refused to let her see how much I had been broken. I had been broken enough by others in my life. This would not be the thing that shattered me. I stood up, pushing the chair back from the table with a force I hadn't known I had. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of it all. But I knew one thing for certain. This was the end. This was the moment when everything changed. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't keep giving. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who would never understand what I'd done for them. I'd given up so much of myself, so much of my life just to be cast aside. I had to stop. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't even about me anymore. It was about my own survival. I needed to heal. I needed to find myself again, to rebuild the parts of me that had been lost in the process of loving her. I couldn't keep going down this path. I couldn't keep letting my life be defined by someone else's selfishness. And so as I stood there, staring out at the darkened sky outside, I made a decision. It wasn't an easy one. In fact, it was the hardest thing I had ever done. But it was the only way forward. I was going to let go. Letting go didn't mean giving up. Letting go meant I was finally going to live for me. For the first time in my life, I was going to put myself first. No more giving, no more sacrificing, no more waiting for someone to love me back the way I loved them. I was done. With that thought, I turned away from the window and walked into the other room, feeling a quiet, cold determination settling within me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be mine. And for the first time in a long time, that thought felt like a promise I would keep to myself. It was time to move on, and this time I wasn't looking back. The weight of the silence was unbearable. I sat there in the same spot, staring at my phone, unable to make sense of the words that had been said to me just moments ago. She had said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly. My own daughter, the person I had poured everything into, had looked me in the eyes and declared that her interests had never been about love, never been about family. No, her interests had been purely material. Her voice still echoed in my ears, cold and indifferent. I used you. I needed you, but not for what you think. It was never about you. It was always about what I could get. I felt the world shift beneath me. How could I have been so blind? How could I have missed it for so long? I could hardly breathe as I processed the weight of her words. My thoughts spiraled, clashing with one another like thunderclaps. I had given her everything. I had sacrificed parts of myself I didn't even know I had, all for her. And now I learned that it had all been a game, a manipulation. Everything she had ever asked for, the money, the endless gifts, the support, had all been a strategy, a way to live without working, to live in comfort without ever having to face the consequences of her actions. She had been using me, and worse, she had planned it all along. It felt as though the air had been sucked from my lungs. I had poured my heart into her. I had shielded her from everything I had suffered as a child, desperate to make her life easier, to give her opportunities I had never had. But to her, it had all been a transaction. She never cared about me. She only cared about what she could take. And then the truth, like a knife in my chest, cut even deeper. I had thought she was just naive, or maybe just lost. But no, she had been playing me, weaving in a web of lies so intricate that I hadn't even seen the strands. I dug through her things, desperate for some explanation, something that would help me understand why she had turned out this way. I opened her laptop, hoping to find something, anything, that could make sense of the chaos in my mind. But what I found wasn't an explanation, it was worse. A series of messages between her and someone I didn't even recognize. The words jumped out at me. I'm leaving. I've got everything set up. I'll go to the city, start fresh, and live my life without her. My heart skipped a beat. It was real. She was already gone. She had left just like that. All my sacrifices, all my love, and she had walked away without a second thought, without even a hint of remorse. It wasn't just the material things that had mattered to her. It was the complete abandonment of everything I had ever tried to build with her. She didn't even need me anymore. She was off to create her own life, one that didn't involve me in any way. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands shaking uncontrollably. My mind raced, but it couldn't keep up with the truth that was crashing down around me. She had taken everything, my money, my love, my life. And now she was gone. And then the other shock hit. My savings were gone. Every penny I had worked so hard to put away for the future, every dime that was meant to secure something for me, was gone. All of it had been spent on her. Her dreams, her desires, her plans. Now I had nothing left, not a cent. I felt the weight of it all crashing down on me. The financial ruin, the emotional devastation. I had nothing left. She had taken it all. I stumbled back from the desk, feeling the walls close in around me. The room was spinning, the edges of my vision blurring. I had nothing. And worse, I had no idea how to begin again. I collapsed into the chair, my hands pressed to my face. The tears came now, hot and unrelenting. I had tried so hard. I had given everything, and for what? The silence in the room grew deeper, thicker, as if the world itself had decided to hold its breath in the aftermath of everything I had lost. The empty space at the table, where our family photograph had once stood, seemed to mock me. It was all gone. Everything I had tried to build, everything I had loved. And then, as if it wasn't enough, a knock on the door shattered the stillness. I rose to answer it, my legs unsteady, my heart pounding in my chest. It was a neighbor, someone I hardly knew. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, her voice tight with discomfort. "But I thought you should know it. Your daughter, she's gone and she left. I don't think she's coming back." Her words were like a final blow, a cruel punctuation to the nightmare I'd been living. She was really gone. I was really alone. I closed the door slowly, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The darkness of the room seemed to deepen, and I found myself unable to move. What was I supposed to do now? Where could I go from here? I wasn't sure. But one thing was clear, I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep fighting for someone who wasn't even there anymore. It was time to let go. But the pain of that truth, the pain of knowing that everything I had done had been for nothing, would stay with me for a long time. And for the first time in my life, I realized I had to rebuild from the very ground up. The weight of the world seemed to press down on me, suffocating me with every breath I took. But in the stillness and the overwhelming silence of my apartment, something inside me stirred. A small flicker of defiance, a spark that had been buried deep for so long, began to awaken. It wasn't much, but it was enough. It was enough to tell myself that I wasn't done. Not yet. I could feel the heaviness of the past days lingering, the emotional wreckage that my daughter had left behind still fresh in my mind. The betrayal, the pain, the deep sense of uselessness. They clung to me like a thick fog. But slowly, in the quiet moments when I wasn't consumed by the darkness, I began to remember something that felt like a distant echo, yet stronger than anything I could have imagined. I had been here before. My childhood had been a battlefield of its own. My parents had never cared for me the way I had always dreamed a child should be cared for. Love was a commodity I couldn't afford. I'd fought for every scrap of attention, for every bit of food, for every moment of peace. But somehow, despite it all, I had survived. I had survived the neglect, the bitterness, the endless struggle. I had survived because I had to. And as I sat in the dark, my hands trembling as I wiped away my tears, I realized something. I was still that person, the person who fought, the person who survived. I wasn't weak, I wasn't broken. I was stronger than I had allowed myself to believe. I had made it through worse, and if I could survive my childhood, I could survive this. I stood up, my legs shaking beneath me, but I stood. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let the emptiness of my daughter's betrayal take away the one thing I still had, my ability to rise again. The first step was admitting it, admitting that I needed help. I wasn't invincible, and this time, I couldn't do it alone. I picked up the phone, my fingers trembling, and made an appointment with a therapist. It was something I had been putting off for years, something I had convinced myself I didn't need, but now I knew better. The scars from my childhood, the wounds that had never healed, had come rushing back with the betrayal of my daughter, and I couldn't ignore them any longer. The first session was awkward, to say the least. I wasn't used to opening up to anyone, especially not about my past, about the deep pain I had buried for so long, but something about the therapist's calm presence made it easier. Slowly, I began to talk about my childhood, about the choices I had made in my life, about the way I had poured all of myself into my daughter, only to be discarded. It wasn't easy. Every word felt like a weight I was carrying, but with each session, I felt a little lighter. It was as if I were finally allowing myself to grieve, to let go of the guilt I had been carrying for so long. I began to reconnect with the people who had once meant something to me. I reached out to old friends, to acquaintances, to those who had been there for me in the past. It wasn't about asking for help. It was about reminding myself that I wasn't alone. I had support, even if it had been buried under years of neglect and self-doubt, and slowly I started to rebuild. I took small steps, a walk in the park, a coffee with a friend, a quiet evening at home, just me and my thoughts. I focused on finding little moments of joy, little pieces of happiness in the wreckage of my life. They were few and far between at first, but they were there, and with each small victory, I began to feel a sense of peace settle in inside me. The weight was still there, but it didn't crush me anymore. I even started to think about the future. What did I want from this life? What could I do with the time I had left? I'd spent so many years giving to others, and now it was time to give something to myself. The idea was terrifying, but also exhilarating. I had spent so much of my life looking after others, trying to fix what was broken in them, that I had forgotten to fix myself. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. I'd already been through hell, and I'd come out stronger on the other side. I would do it again if I had to, but just as I began to feel that small sense of peace, a message came through on my phone. I stared at the screen, heart sinking. It was her, my daughter. She was reaching out, but this time it wasn't the same as before. Her message was different, cold, calculating, distant. She was asking for something. But what? Was it just more manipulation, more lies? My heart raced, the fragile calm I had worked so hard to build suddenly crumbling. I wasn't sure what this meant, but I knew one thing for sure, that I had a choice to make. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't going to let someone else's demands dictate my life. I was going to stand my ground. This time I wasn't going to be used. I wasn't going to fall into the same trap again. I was going to choose me. The sun was setting as I walked through the park, my thoughts swirling around the uncertain future ahead. I had come to terms with a lot in the past few weeks. The betrayal, the loss, the empty promises. But somehow, I was starting to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. A faint glimmer, but enough to hold on to. It was then, as I passed a small cafe at the corner of the park, that I noticed the man sitting at a table outside, sketching in a notebook. His presence seemed to draw me in like a quiet force, and without thinking, I stopped. Something about him felt familiar, but it wasn't the kind of familiarity you get from knowing someone. It was the kind that comes from understanding, from sharing a silent moment of connection. He looked up, his eyes meeting mine, and smiled, not a forced smile, but one that held kindness in it. "I don't suppose you'd want to join me for a coffee?" he asked, his voice warm, but without pressure. I hesitated for a moment, then nodded. There was something in his presence that felt safe. As I sat down, we began to talk. At first, it was nothing more than small talk, but soon the conversation deepened. And before I knew it, I found myself sharing things I hadn't even said to myself out loud. The betrayal, the pain, the fear of losing everything, the feeling of having nothing left. He listened, really listened, and when I finished speaking, he smiled again. "You've been carrying a heavy burden for a long time, but sometimes we get so caught up in the past that we forget the future is still ours to create." His words lingered in the air like a lifeline thrown into a stormy sea. And as he continued to talk, I realized something. This was the first time in a long time that I'd spoken to someone who saw me, truly saw me, not as a victim, not as someone to be pitied, but as a person who could rebuild. Over the next few weeks, I met with him regularly. His name was Alan, and he was more than just a man with a kind face. He was a financial consultant, someone who had worked with people through all kinds of hardships. He helped me start putting my finances in order, step by step, slowly rebuilding what had been lost. But more than that, he helped me start to rebuild myself, my confidence, my sense of purpose, my strength. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of the world felt unbearable, when the urge to fall back into old patterns of self-doubt and fear was overwhelming. But Alan showed me how to break things down into small, manageable steps, how to find joy in the smallest victories. A quiet morning with a cup of coffee, a walk in the park, a few minutes of peace before the storm of thoughts would return. For the first time in ages, I began to feel a sense of balance. I started to make decisions for myself, not out of obligation or guilt, but because I knew I deserved better. And then, just as I thought I was getting my life back on track, I received a message that threw everything into turmoil. It was from her, my daughter. She had reached out again. But this time, the message wasn't filled with anger or resentment. Instead, it was strangely calm. She apologized, told me she had made mistakes, that she wanted to come back into my life. She wanted to rebuild our relationship, but this time she wanted it to be different. For a moment, I felt the familiar tug in my chest, the pull to reach out, to open my heart to her once more. But then, just as quickly, I remembered everything I had been through. The sacrifices, the manipulation, the emotional toll. I stared at the message, my heart racing. Part of me wanted to forgive, to hope that this time it would be different. But another part of me, the part that had grown stronger over the past few weeks, knew better. I called Alan. He answered immediately, sensing the turmoil in my voice. "What's going on?" he asked gently. "She wants to come back," I said, my voice tight. "She's asking for a second chance. But I don't know if I can do this again. I don't know if I can trust her." Alan paused for a moment. "I think you need to ask yourself what you need. Not what she needs, not what anyone else needs. What do you need?" His question hit me harder than I expected. What did I need? For the first time in a long time, I realized that I needed to protect myself. I needed to set boundaries, to stop letting someone else's needs dictate my life. I can't go back to the way things were, I whispered, the weight of the decision settling over me. I can't let her use me again. Alan's voice was steady. Then don't. You're stronger than that. You've come so far. This is your life now, not hers. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. He was right. I had come so far, and I couldn't let my past undo all the progress I had made. The next day, I sat down and wrote to my daughter. I told her that while I loved her, I couldn't allow her back into my life in the same way. I had to protect myself, my peace, and my well-being. I set clear boundaries, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace with my decision. As I hit send, I realized that this wasn't the end of our relationship, but it was the beginning of something new. A relationship built on honesty, boundaries, and respect, not manipulation and guilt. I stood up, my heart lighter than it had been in months. I was no longer defined by my past, by my mistakes, or by my daughter's actions. I was defined by my choices, my strength, and the life I was now choosing to build. And as I looked out the window, I realized something. The future, the one I had once thought was out of reach, was finally mine to shape. It was a quiet morning when I woke up, the first rays of sunlight slipping through the curtains, gently lighting the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt calm. Not the kind of calm that comes from avoiding the storm, but the kind that comes from having weathered it and emerging stronger, steadier. I sat up in bed, the weight of my past lifting just a little more each day. I had spent so long trying to fix everything and everyone around me, thinking that if I just gave enough, loved enough, I could make things right. But in the silence of that morning, I realized that it wasn't my job to fix anyone. It wasn't my responsibility to make up for other people's mistakes or to sacrifice my own well-being for others. For years, I had poured my energy into relationships, friendships, family, all with the belief that my worth was tied to what I could give. But now I knew better. I knew that my happiness, my peace, had to come from within. It had to come from my choices, my boundaries, my ability to say no more. For the first time in years, I felt free. Free from the guilt, free from the expectations, free from the burden of trying to save someone else. I stood up and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not the same person I had been when this all started. She was stronger, wiser, and more resilient. She had learned how to protect herself, how to love herself, how to put herself first. And for the first time in years, I smiled. I smiled because I realized that I was enough. I had always been enough. As I started my morning routine, I felt something shift within me. It was as if I had finally stepped into my own life. I no longer saw myself through the lens of past mistakes or the actions of others. I saw myself for who I truly was. A woman who had fought, who had survived, who had the power to create her own future. Then, just as I was settling into this new sense of peace, my phone rang. I looked at the screen and there it was. Her name. My daughter. I hesitated, my heart skipping a beat. I had spent so many years hoping for this moment, hoping she would come back, hoping she would apologize, hoping she would realize the depth of my love for her. But now I wasn't sure what I wanted. I had worked so hard to rebuild my life, and the thought of letting her back in, without knowing if she had truly changed, filled me with uncertainty. I answered the call, my voice steady but guarded. Hello? She sounded different this time. The anger and resentment from before were gone. Mom, I've been thinking a lot about everything. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry. I want to fix things. I want to come back into your life if you'll let me. My heart tightened, and for a brief moment, the old feelings of hope and longing surged within me. But I didn't allow myself to fall into that trap. I'd been down this road before, and I knew better now. I couldn't let her back in without boundaries, without protecting myself. I appreciate your apology, I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. But I've changed too, and I can't just go back to the way things were. I've worked hard to find peace, and I need to keep that. I can't allow myself to be hurt again. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I could hear her breathing, the weight of my words sinking in, and then quietly she said, I understand. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. Maybe one day we can rebuild a relationship, but it has to be different this time. It has to be built on trust and respect. But right now, I have to focus on me. Another long pause. Okay, Mom, I get it. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. And with that, the call ended. I sat there for a moment, the phone still pressed to my ear, my mind racing. It felt like the end of an era. The woman I had been, the mother who had sacrificed everything for her child, was gone, and in her place was someone who had learned to stand on her own, someone who knew that her worth was not defined by the people who came and went in her life. The relief washed over me in waves. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel sorrow. I felt strength. I felt peace. I knew that I had made the right decision. I had finally chosen myself. I had finally chosen to stop looking for validation from others and to start living for me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for it. I stood up, took a deep breath, and looked out the window. The world was still there, waiting for me, full of possibilities, full of opportunities. I didn't need anyone's approval. I didn't need anyone to tell me I was enough. I knew that now, and that was all I needed. This was my new beginning. As I turned away from the window, I knew one thing for certain. This was the first day of the rest of my life. A life that was mine to shape, mine to live, free from the chains of the past. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely, entirely free.